welcome to today's creative meditation session. My name is Bhavesh. I'll be taking today's session with you all. So the theme for today's creative meditation is uncovering our authentic or true self and understanding the games of ego, games of, what other games go on in our lives. Okay, so today's first poem is called Pure and True Pride. So Nimisha's just going to put up the artwork. Here it is. It's more like a diagram than artwork, but I'll explain what it means in a moment. So pure and true pride. Om Shanti. There are two ways in this world stay. Those that rise above and those that love too much. Some live up there, others down here. One in a world of light, others fogged, unclear sight. One locked in the head, the other in a world of golden red. One tempted by desire, unaware that they are liars, shaking into criers. Always in two camps, flickering are their lamps. Imbalanced, limited are their talents. Too much in their head, here and there they are led. Wasted thoughts, confused, too short is their fuse. Lacks virtue of the divine, always crossing the respect line. Ego too great, only creates hate. Too much in the heart, too sweet like sickly tarts, lacks spiritual power like wilted flowers. Every step tentative, in this stage just sensitive. Ego too small, only falls and crawls. So going to the source who rebalances with no force the heads and the hearts, reveals how to be a true art, from indulging in sensual pleasure into being and seeing life as leisure. One whose lamp's light never gets sour, remains above like a lotus flower, sits on a heart throne, never asks for loans, earns true income, accurate in thoughts, words and deeds, never wading through reeds, simply aiding the seed. Om Shanti. So that's pure and true pride. This is a very deep poem with lots of wisdom behind it. So I'll just explain this image very quickly. So as we know, it all begins with understanding our true selves. And understanding our true selves is our pride is based on that. And then the other side of it is ego. Ego is based on a false, well, not really a false identity, but a limited identity of the self. So pride is based on our identity when we're off the world stage. So as we know, when we're off the world stage, there's only one identity. And that identity is I, the soul, a child of divinity, a child of the Supreme. And then on the other side, if we look at the identities when we're in this physical world, there are many I's. So there's one capital I, and that is I, the soul, a child of the Supreme. But once we incarnate or take a physical form into a body, the first I is I am a man, or I am a boy, or I am a girl. We identify with the body. And then next thing, as we grow up, the next thing we identify is a relationship. So maybe it's parents with a mum or a dad. And then what else? We develop a characteristics and a personality. So another thing we may identify with is our personality, our characteristics. I am funny, I am happy, I am sad, I am angry. All these sort of emotions come out, and these are all little I's. What else do we identify with? We may identify with the role that we play, our job, our conditions that we live in. I am rich, I am poor, our health, our wealth. All these are little I's. Now these little I's is where ego comes about. So if my identity is based on just the one I, the soul, a child of the Supreme, this is the only identity that is permanent, that's there throughout our life. But even at the end of living, when we move on, we still have this identity of I, the soul. Whereas all other identities, we start and then they end, hence them being a limited identity. So ego comes about. So ego is like the almost like the negative form of pride. Pride, I would say, is your self-respect, your well-being. But to understand this fine line between pride and ego. Pride is self-respect. Ego is when we step over this line and we go into ego. And ego is when we over-identify, when we love too much, these little I's. So this image at the bottom, as you can see, it's a face that's got so many different identities that we identify with, so many different roles that we play, and then it drags us down into the physical, and we get engrossed in the physical. Whereas when we learn to drop these I's, understanding it's just a role that I'm playing, it's just part of the part, rather than my self-respect being based on that. And when I understand that, what I can do is, when I sit in meditation, I can drop these little I's. So we all have the experience of sitting in meditation, but our thoughts get pulled in many different directions into different roles. So when I learn to drop these I's, then I could start making this journey upwards. The world stage being this physical world, backstage is a place of existence beyond this physical world. We all started from this space and we all finish in this space. And if we see this space as a starting place and an ending point, if you look at our days, we start in the same place and we end in the same place, which is home. So this is actually at the end of our journey, we return back home. At the start of our journey, we started at home. So it's like a sweet silence home beyond the physical realm of space and time. Space and time being our journey or our daily activity. And then when it's time to rest, we practice going upwards to go home. But in order to do that, we have to drop all the limited identities that we hold on to. Otherwise, we're unable to rest. So that final image, as you can see, is someone that's just turned inwards. And the practice of turning inwards allows the first face is caught up in the limited eyes and is dragged downwards into the physical. And then we fluctuate based on that. So to really understand what ego does is when ego comes about, it creates a separation. There's me and mine, and then there's you and yours. And when there's separation, we see positions that are higher than ourselves or lower than ourselves. And when we see things higher or lower, this is what ego is. This is what ego comes out as. We see jealousy or we feel arrogant. One or the other comes about, rather than seeing a unity or a harmony. There is ego. Ego creates separation, which then causes desires. They're like this, I'm like this, I want to be like them. And this I of a limited nature creates ego. That's what's happening with that bottom face. When we learn to drop these I's, we're able to understand and make our original I the soul. So this I can take us into materialism, or this I can take us upwards. So can you see the upward spiral that goes up? And then it's just a direct path up to a divine space. So it's I. When I identify with limited things, it could feed our ego. And then if our ego becomes very big, it bruises very easily. And when it bruises very easily, we feel quite sensitive to people's comments and things like that. So there's two sides to ego. The one that is visible, and it's maybe a generalization, but it could be known as the male ego, the one of thinking I am better, the arrogance that comes about of look at me, look what I can do, da 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 da. Look at my achievements, look at this. No, this is how it should be done. Let me fix you. All these sort of attitudes come from that space of an arrogant I, or the male ego. But there's actually another ego, the flip side to that ego, which is also known as I'm not good enough. I put myself down. So this can be known as the female ego, where we don't feel worthy. This is still a form of ego. So ego is when we overvalue or we undervalue ourselves, taking us away from our line of self-respect, our pride. The ego is over or under self-respect. It's just one line. So that's what this poem is about. Learning to drop the little I's that feeds our ego. And it's a very slippery slope because we don't understand that it's hard to notice, unless we have a practice of really observing ourselves closely. We don't even realize that there's ego coming about in ourselves. So it's a very interesting thing. So whenever I find myself getting sensitive, understand that there's some limited I somewhere that I'm still clinging on to that I need to let go of. So it's easier said than done, really, but it's a lifelong journey of self-observation, which allows us to drop the I's and then become centered on our pride. So this is true and pure pride, understanding what our self-respect is and understanding when we get caught up in these little I's. So we'll take this into a bit of a breathing exercise now. So this breathing exercise is called Ujjayi breathing, or victorious breath. Oh yes, we take the artwork down. So Ujjayi breathing or victorious breath. Initially it's just learning to deep breathe. When we breathe, we want to sit up tall, so lengthen the spine, roll the shoulders back and down. Maybe tuck the chin in slightly, lengthen the back of the neck. So just placing the hand on the abdomen. And when we inhale, we just want to inflate the abdomen. Then move the breath into the chest and then into the throat. And then as we exhale, releasing the air from the throat, chest, shoulders fall, and sucking the abdomen back to the spine. So just do that a few more times, inhaling long, slow, deep breaths. And then exhaling. Once again, inhaling. And then exhaling. And now what we want to do is, we're going to continue breathing like that, but we want to lengthen the exhales as much as possible. The exhales are all about releasing, all about letting go, all about relaxation. So sometimes if we have all these little I's, little roles that we play, little responsibilities going on in our mind, it takes us away from being centered. It feeds our ego of, am I better or am I not good enough? So letting go of all of those I's and just become centered in either soul. So on the exhale, every exhale, just maybe observe yourself letting go these eyes. Once again, just doing natural breathing. Inhaling the long, slow, deep breaths. And then exhale, sucking the abdomen back towards the spine. Inhaling. And then exhaling. So that's just deep breathing. So now we're going to add on Ujjayi breathing. It's also known as ocean's breath or victorious breath. What we do for this breathing is we're focusing on the exhale and we're sort of constricting the back of the throat. So I'm going to do it with my mouth open to begin with, just so you understand what happens with the throat. So it's the same muscle you engage as if you were whispering. So if I start to whisper, I'm engaging this muscle, which then creates this sound of whispering. So on the exhale, we just want to engage that muscle. So I'm going to do it with my mouth open now, so inhaling. Then as I exhale, inhaling, and then exhaling. We'll do it one more time, inhaling. So doing it together. And then exhale. So it creates that soft sound of the ocean. It's all about releasing, letting go of the ego. So if you're practicing with an open mouth seems a bit strange. Normally it's done with the mouth closed, but the sound is not as audible, so it should be audible to the self. So we'll just practice that a few more times for ourselves. So lengthening the spine, rolling the shoulders back and down. Maybe placing the hands on the abdomen if you wish. Taking it, exhaling completely. We're going to do the same breath with the mouth closed now, engaging the muscle at the back of the throat so we hear that sound of the ocean on the inside. So inhaling. And then exhaling. Inhaling. And then exhaling. Inhaling. And then exhaling. Final breath, inhaling. And then exhaling. And then just come back to natural breathing for a moment now. So the benefits of this Ujjayi breathing: on the inhale and the exhale, it naturally warms up the body from the inside. So there's a warmth that's created, but it also brings a coolness to the mind, a coolness to the head. So it helps rebalance that energy of warmth for the body, coolness for the mind. So that's called Ujjayi breathing. Accumulate self-sovereignty. So it's like a step-by-step process. Once we're able to drop the I of ego, we're able to take control of ourselves. And when we're able to take control of ourselves, we can understand that our sense organs themselves is a tool or a sensory thing that we use to observe the external, rather than it being our reality. So this poem is called Accumulating Self-Sovereignty, because the path of a Raj Yogi, Raja means a king, Yoga means a union. So a Raj Yogi is one who's in control of oneself, to be a ruler of the self. So accumulating self-sovereignty, Om Shanti. In a world that's dark, ends up stumbling, can't speak, mumbling, uneasy, grumbling, falling tumbling. When we over-relate, that's when we contaminate. Shallow minds full of waste, hollow intellects just haste, yellow-bellied hearts indulge in tastes. The face grows long, however, the grandfather comes along, shows us how we belong. The cream of the crop now be adopt, gives his property and establishes the day, holds the hand and shows the way. My children come home to me, to an ocean of bliss and purity. Tan the soul that's covered in mold, tired and old, into this fire become real gold. Remember, come into this warm glow, I will show the way to cool and to rule. A mind only just kind, the intellect reflects, inner rhymes, the heart free from creating any farts. Turn to me, free the self from the coils, attain the status of royals. However, remember, only in this high tower, just come up and devour, accumulate yoga power. Remember, time is late, it won't wait, have faith and accumulate. Om Shanti. Once we free ourselves from the identities of ego, we can turn inwards, and then the ability of turning upwards to this space of belonging beyond allows us to start taking control of our senses. There's more than 5 senses. There's 5 senses to observe our external. Then there's the sense organs of the soul. The sense organs of the soul are the mind, the intellect, and then our impressions or personality traits, or our memory tract. There's many different names for it. So these are our 3 subtle senses of the soul. So there's 2 ways how this works. We can all be engrossed by the materialistic things that happen in our lives, and then maybe it's a taste, and we like a particular type of food, and we eat a particular type of food quite a lot. And if we don't get it, we may get upset. So then we're at the influence or at the mercy of our taste buds. Maybe it's seeing a particular type of colour or a vision. Maybe it's touch. Maybe it's listening to a particular type of music, or a smell takes us into a certain direction. So these can be seen, as you can see in this image, like a horse. And these horses can be wild, running in this direction or that direction, or whatever direction the senses are pulled to. And then that has an impact on our mental state, because the mind becomes subservient to the senses. And then when the mind becomes subservient to the senses, our intellect is different from the mind. The intellect is almost like our ability to reason, our ability to analyze. It's also our willpower. It's that part of us that does the observation of what's going on inside. So that's what the intellect is. Now, if the intellect is weak, then our senses are drawn in we're drawn in all sorts of directions through our sense organs, because our willpower is not that strong. Whereas when the intellect is strong, it's also our analytical side that makes decisions, that judges. So as you can see the image of the intellect, the scales, so it does an assessment, balancing things out before making a decision. And then how the mind and the intellect interact creates our personality, one that's under an influence, that's given its power away to the external, or one that's centered and controlled. Our senses are controlled. We can choose to switch off from our senses and be aware of our internal sense organs of the mind, the intellect, and develop a personality trait that's beneficial for ourselves. Or we can get drawn into our senses, which then influences our mind, our decision-making ability, and creates habits that we know that are bad for ourselves, but we can't help ourselves but follow these habits, these damaging tendencies. So the practice and the path of a Raj Yogi is one that's able to take control, not just of the physical senses, these horses, but also our subtle senses, the mind, the intellect, and our personality traits. So the way we can see this is in one level of consciousness, the material level. The awareness is what's going on around me, and we're being influenced by our senses. And then how does that make me feel? What's going on around? How does that make me feel? And then our feelings are going up and down based on what's going on around us. Whereas a Raj Yogi starts the other way around. We start with the subtle senses of the mind and the intellect. So the intellect simply plays this role of observing the thoughts in the mind, and then decides to put into practice beneficial thoughts for the self. So the mind creates 4 types of thoughts. Positive thoughts, which are those that are benefit for myself and benefit for those around us. Negative thoughts, which are the opposite, which cause harm to the self and harm for those around us. If it feels beneficial for the self but it's causing harm to people around us, it's still a negative thought or a negative thought. Then the other one is known as wasteful thinking, thoughts that we don't really need to be thinking about, and our time and energy is being wasted rather than it being used in a productive way. So if we waste a lot of thoughts during our day, our ability to think or the power of our thoughts diminish. And then we lose our ability to leave an influence because there's so much cyclic thoughts going on, because our thoughts are wasted, our energy is wasted, so there's less power behind our thoughts. And finally, just planning thoughts that we have no feeling behind. So just like raising my hand creates a thought, happens. Or brushing your teeth, or standing, or walking, all these sort of thoughts. We create the thought and it happens instinctively almost. So those are the type of thoughts that the mind creates. The intellect decides to put the thoughts into practice or to leave them at a thought level. And then that creates our personality, our imprint of experience in our life. So Raj Yogi is aware of this inner process, this inner world of our mind and our intellect, and then uses our sense organs to act. So these horses can be wild and running in all different directions, or we can use our subtle senses to tame these wild horses, so they act to the orders of the soul. So that's what this image represents. Am I in control of my sense organs, or am I under the influence of the sense organs? A Raj Yogi is one that's in control, that has reins over the senses. It doesn't mean to not use the senses, it just means that the sense organs have no control over us. Okay, so I guess we can take this image down. It's really understanding the path of a Raj Yogi. They live above the physical world. The physical world, we can get drawn into it, and then it feeds the ego, feeds our pride. So who am I really? I, the soul. And to really go into the experience of this is where Raj Yoga begins. So we'll do a little bit of a meditation exercise now. What I would like you to do again, just sit comfortably, lengthen the spine, roll the shoulders back and down. So it's really important to keep the spine long because it allows energy to flow better through the body. tucking the chin in, lifting the crown of the head up towards the ceiling. And then again, just become aware of your breath. Gently breathing in and out through the nose. Enjoy a few breaths here. Body still uncomfortable. Breath is rhythmic. Then every exhale we simply let go. Let go of our day. Become present. Let go of any things that I might need to do afterwards. I let go of my identities, the limited identities. I let go of relationship. I let go of jobs. I let go of characteristics. And I simply become centered in my self-respect. I, the soul, the living being, seated in the center of the forehead, the silent witness, the observer, completely present in this moment. Observing through the eyes. Observing any sound, if there's any sound, through the ears. Just simply being an observer. As I practice this, the mind, the body is filled with a sense of peace and appreciation. Peace and appreciation is like the breath to the soul. And I hold this experience of peace and appreciation inside myself. And for a moment, I simply let go of even the body, turning my mind upwards to the divine, taking a step off the stage of life and going to my home. This sweet home of silence beyond the physical. And in this home of silence, I take a moment to just simply be still and accumulate. By connecting to the divine, by coming in front of the divine, by feeling his presence. I accumulate a power of yoga. A constantly connected cord to charge the battery of the soul. The soul has the power to put into practice the wisdom it knows, to play the part like an art, and yet at the same time be detached and loving. Be equal in both detachment, impartiality, as well as being loving. So by stepping out of the vehicle of the body, I'm able to stay in my seat of self-respect and maintain my pure spiritual pride. And in a moment, I return back to the body, but still yet aware of that space of belonging above and beyond the physical. But being aware of this space, the intellect is elevated. The intellect becomes divine. And then my performance on this world stage is done with a stage of royalty, where I'm in control of the self. This is a sign of a royal person, one who becomes a self-sovereign, in control of all 8 senses. The 5 physical senses to explore the external, but also in control of our 3 subtle senses to explore our internal world. And to make our internal world strong, stable, so we can leave a positive, peaceful impact on the external, rather than being influenced. Become the influencer by being in control of oneself. Om Shanti. So it's an interesting thing to think about. We coming to a point of where we slowly, bit by bit, let go of ego and stay in our spiritual pride. And it's by staying in our spiritual pride we can start separating the external from the internal and be aware of what's happening inside ourselves. Just by observing. So people call this mindfulness. It's a form of meditation where we simply observe what's happening, the thoughts that come and go from a distance. Or a good way of seeing this is almost like sitting at a riverbank, watching thoughts go by in little boats. Or maybe at the edge of a road and watching if the thoughts are going by really fast, watching them as cars go by. So instead of being caught up in the thought, stepping back, observing, being that silent witness, that impartial observer in our performance, allows us to actually make very clear, decisive thoughts, clear, decisive actions. This is where the intellect opens. The intellect becomes divine. Our ability to discern grows. And we know what to do, because there's an instinct that awakens within to solve or be resourceful to deal with whatever issues or challenges we may be facing. We're either under the control of our ego, or we stay in spiritual pride.